Hi class, this is Professor Bankard, and I want to welcome all of you into reflecting on Christian character. This is a philosophy class within your program that's going to focus on Christian ethics, character formation. We connect it some to spiritual formation and other things. A little bit about myself. My name's Joe Bankard. I've been teaching at NNU for over a decade now. It's crazy. Time goes very fast. I was raised in California. I went to college in San Diego at Point Loma, which is a sister Nazarene college. I majored in philosophy. Went to San Diego State for some grad work in philosophy, and then eventually completed my PhD at Claremont in the LA area in philosophy of religion. So I've been doing philosophy for a long time. I love it. I'm passionate about it. My area of specialization and of primary interest is in ethics, and Christian ethics specifically. So this class is right in line with a lot of my passions and my loves. Some about me, I've been married since 1999. My wife Kelly, I met her at Point Loma. She got her master's in social work and was a school counselor for a while. When we had children, we now have two children, Sullivan and Nina, elementary school ages, wonderful kids. When we had children, she stopped doing social work, was home for a while, and now is working actually for two separate financial planners. We live in Boise. We love it. This is a beautiful place. We're very fortunate to be here. Some of the things I enjoy doing outside of being a nerd and reading a lot of philosophy and other things, I enjoy snow skiing in the winter, although I'm not that great. I picked it up a little bit later in life, about 6 years ago. I love golfing in the summer, and I enjoy watching sports, like I play fantasy football, and I sort of enjoy watching that. I used to be an athlete, but not so much anymore. I really enjoy movies and good television, so I'm always open to suggestions if you run into something that you really like. Students often ask my favorite movie. I don't know, but I've got several favorites. My favorite theological sort of obscure movie is The Tree of Life. It's almost like taking Augustine's Confessions and trying to make a movie about it. It's very poetic, so it's not a linear story. It's a lot of images and music and other things, but I think it's very powerful. My favorite sort of standard popular movie is Shawshank Redemption. I love that film. I think it's about the kingdom of God from my perspective, how I interpret it. Andy Dufresne lives into a reality that doesn't exist. He lives as though he is free. And in doing that, not only is he free, but he frees others. And as Christians, we're supposed to live into the kingdom of God, even now on earth, where the kingdom is only seen in part. But to the extent that we can do that, we bring about the kingdom. So I really love that film. But I'm open to suggestions, anything that you might have for me. I want to tell you a little bit about the class. So this is a little bit about me. I love being outside. I like hiking. I like sports. I love reading and philosophy. In terms of the class, I'm structuring it in a very particular way. It's a little bit like making a semester-long argument, right? And it starts with the premise that we've gotten ethics wrong in the West, predominantly because we have focused on rational decision-making. Ethics is mostly about, in the moment, thinking about what the right thing to do is, a particular Bible verse we'd have to think about, or maybe the golden rule, what would I want other people to do to me? And then we say, okay, I know what the right thing to do is, and now I need to do it, right? So a very rational method of decision making. I think this gets human nature wrong. I think most of our decisions are made based on intuition, emotion. They happen very quickly. My tone, how I treat someone, how I look at someone. I think we've often ignored the role that intuition, that instinct, that emotion plays in our moral decision making. So the first book we're going to be reading is Jonathan Haidt's book here. It's called The Righteous Mind. I think it's a great book. He is a moral psychologist, so he is going to be doing the work of how do humans make moral decisions? What's happening in our brains when we make moral decisions? What evidence do we have that we rely on reason versus emotion? This first text is academic, but I think it's very readable, and it's descriptive. So Jonathan Haidt, the author, is not going to say, this is how you ought to make moral decisions. This is the right thing versus the wrong thing to do. That's not what's going to happen in that text. The book is about a descriptive analysis of what is happening in a human person that impacts the moral decision that they actually make. So it's trying to engage the social sciences, psychology, neurophysiology to figure out, how do we make moral decisions? His dominant argument, which I've been convinced by, is most moral decisions are made via emotion, instinct, and intuition. If Jonathan Haidt is right, then if I want to become more moral, I shouldn't be emphasizing my reason and decision-making in the moment, but instead, if I want to become more moral, I have to begin training my instincts, my intuitions, and my emotions so that my natural responses are more in line with the person I hope to be. So it's shifting ethics away from rules. It's shifting it away from reason and from pro-con lists, from this heightened abstract view of morality, to shaping my guttural desires, feelings, and wants. The second book we're going to read is by Richard Beck. He's a Christian psychologist. He teaches at Abilene Christian University. It's called Unclean. His research project, he's written several books. They all deal with psychological barriers to the Christian life. What are the psychological barriers that make it difficult for us to be moral, to be Christ-like? So he connects to Jonathan Haidt, the first text we're going to read, because he too believes much of what we do as Christians is impulse-driven, is more emotionally driven. So one set of barriers deals with our disgust mechanism, our disgust triggers. This is why the book is called Unclean, right? Many of us would like to be kind to the homeless, for instance, but it's very difficult if you're around homeless people because the smell, the dirt, it triggers that feeling of like where we crinkle our nose, that universal notion of like, oh, I feel like it's going to rub off on me. The dirt, the smell, right? By touching, being around, being familiar with these people, it will rub off on me. We have a very strong contamination psychological mechanism that says if I touch something that's contaminated, or if I eat something that's contaminated, I will become dirty. We do not often think if I touch what is undirty, I will make it clean. It's a one-way contamination situation, right? And that makes sense. If I rub an apple in the dirt, I don't think it makes the dirt taste good. I think the dirt makes the apple taste bad. It gets contaminated, right? And that makes sense in lots of situations, but psychologically we begin to do this with people. Sinful people will contaminate us and our communities. We want to remove them. So rather than showing Christian hospitality and love, which is what our call is to do, we want to remove the sinful and the dirty from our midst. Shunning, judgment, we make them realize, right? Like, we'll come and help the homeless. Come on a Wednesday night, we'll feed you, but don't show up to our Sunday services, right? So this notion of our psychological mechanism of contamination makes it hard for us to be Christian in all kinds of ways. It was partly why it was hard to find people to help feed those that had AIDS. So for a long time in the 80s, churches were not stepping up to feed those with AIDS, to provide food, medical attention, because there was a fear, right? I'm going to catch it. I will be contaminated. So we're called to love the most marginalized, but instead we were keeping our distance, right? Over time, the church got better at responding to that need, but a lot of it is that fear of contamination. The logic of Jesus is actually separate from that, right? The logic of Jesus is when Jesus comes to touch the leper, Jesus is not contaminated. The leper is made clean. When Jesus eats meals with sinners or engages with prostitutes, he is not made dirty. They are made clean. Well, if we are Christ's representatives on earth, we have to overcome this psychological barrier to extend radical love and hospitality to the most marginalized, oppressed, and excluded. The third text will be N.T. Wright's After You Believe. This book is, okay, I'm Christian, now what? What am I supposed to do? Am I waiting to die so I can go to heaven? And N.T. Wright says, no. You become a Christian, and the goal then is to pursue holiness, right? Nazarenes are part of the holiness tradition. N.T. Wright is a Methodist, which is also part of the Wesleyan holiness tradition. We are here to develop Christ-like character. So N.T. Wright's going to make the argument that it's not just about making choices, it's about cultivating virtuous character. That the practices we engage in regularly will shape our characters, will shape our desires, and those will help us do the right things when we need to, when we're called upon. So he says we have to move away from law-based and rule-based morality as Christians. We have to shift towards character-based morality. If I want to train my emotions, my intuitions, my natural judgments, if I want to become a more naturally moral person, then I have to begin shaping myself through small actions every day. So think about virtuous development like athletics. If I want to learn how to dribble a basketball, I start really slow. I have a coach, someone who helps me know how to dribble properly. I dribble for thousands of hours, and then what do you know? Professional basketball players can dribble without even thinking about it. They've went from consciously like looking at the ball dribbling to unconsciously dribbling great and scanning the defense, right? Dribbling has gotten inside of them. It's become a skill they can do automatically. That's how we want generosity, honesty, integrity, kindness, and courage to be. If you've ever learned how to play an instrument, you start by like, where do I put my hands for this particular chord? And you're strumming, right? But over time, you play the guitar so many hours that you can actually play worship music and you're thinking about something else. You're like worshiping God with your mind while you're playing the guitar. It's gotten inside of you, become a skill that you can do automatically. You've been shaped. Well, what would it be like to think about generosity, love, hope, courage, justice, these virtues that we want to become like that, where we practice them enough and they shape who we are from the inside out? So N.T. Wright's going to be talking about that from a Christian perspective. We will then read Glittering Vices by Rebecca DeYoung, a wonderful text about, so if virtues are positive patterns that shape us into the likeness of Christ, the opposite of that would be vices, patterns in our life that bring us away from God and away from our neighbor, that break relationship. What are these patterns and how do we overcome them? So she gives a lot of practical advice for identifying vices in our lives and then for spiritual disciplines that might help us overcome those vices to shape us into the likeness of Christ. And then finally, the most controversial book, I think, in the class, it's called Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God. It's by Kelly Brown Douglas. I'm going to ask you to approach that text with an open mind. It's going to be a challenge, right? She's going to have a lot of strong things to say about race in our country, about racial past, about modern day mass incarceration and the criminal justice system. What I want is for you not to become defensive, but to just listen and to try to take away as much as you can from her perspective. How does the world look from her perspective without defending yourself at all? So you're a scientist wanting to explore her worldview and understand where she's coming from and why she thinks what she does. She is a female black theologian. She is a powerful speaker and writer. I feel incredibly challenged and convicted when I read the text. I feel defensive at times when I read the text. I'm working, as I'm asking you to work, to actually try to become more open-minded, right? As a white male who experiences the world in a particular way, has a certain background, education, all of that, I feel challenged, and it's hard for me sometimes not to just want to be defensive and say, no, you're only seeing this from one side. But I'm asking you, and I'm going to do it myself, to put that aside, to try to set that defensiveness aside and say, I want to ask questions of her. I want to ask questions of the text. I want to engage and listen well. I want to be humble and say, my perspective of the world dominates. The white male perspective of the world is everywhere. It's time for me to listen and engage a perspective other than my own. As a theologian, she's also going to talk about theology from a sort of black womanist perspective and how we might engage some of these familiar texts in a new way. And so I hope you're willing to engage. This, of course, deals with ethics, morality, and Christian formation, because as Christians, we have to care about justice, racial justice, economic justice, and the kingdom of God. We're not here just to not drink or not go to R-rated movies, right? Our morality is not just about a morality of what we don't do. We also have a social responsibility to bring about the kingdom of God, to live out our faith and our morality in the world, right? To make the world better, more like the kingdom of God, which includes embracing racial diversity, racial equality, economic diversity, and economic equality. We are here in part to bring about that kingdom and to live our faith out in the world. And so we'll be talking about that as we cover that final text. So that's a little bit of an introduction into the course, into the journey that we'll be taking. I encourage you to the next video to watch would be about the syllabus. I'm going to walk you through my expectations, the assignments, some do's and don'ts, and so I encourage you to watch that next. I'm excited about this class. I think it's going to be a great adventure. Please email me, call me, introduce yourself, let me get to know you a little bit as well, and I think we'll start this off on the right foot.